Talking Heads Chronology. The mic test at the kitchen, the 13th of March, 1976.
This is actually me checking the mic for feedback and the volume of the mic. And it was kind of the way I would do it in those days. I think later on you might hear me do it in some other clubs.
I think we did the mic test in front of a live audience.
This is CBGB's. We were still a three-piece. We lived around the corner on Christie Street. It was about 2 or 3 blocks away. You just have to step over the homeless people and dodge the low-price hookers that worked that neighborhood. That neighborhood's changed a lot now. There's a Whole Foods on the corner and a giant steel and glass condo. CBGB's, of course, is gone. The policy at CBGB's was that Hilly, the owner, allowed bands like ourselves to audition and play our own original songs. That meant us, the Ramones, Television, and a bunch of other bands. There's a million bands that played there that nobody's heard of. Hair bands played there. Progressive rock bands played there. There were country bands that played there. Those bands kind of get not remembered as much as being typical, but they were typical. They were just as much a part of that scene as we were. We just were doing something a little bit more unusual than some of those other bands.
Well, this is the first time I'm seeing these. Never saw them back in the day, so it's very interesting. It's kind of like seeing a new band I've never seen before, except that everything is so familiar in a really good way.
I look at this footage and I realized I didn't have my front tooth fixed yet. When I was a teenager, twice I had some dental damage. Once when I was laughing in the bathroom with my sister and I smashed my front tooth into the sink and it broke off. And then another time, also with her, when I was on a backyard swing and I fell off and the swing came back and hit me right in the mouth, knocked another big chunk out of my front tooth. I think by the time Talking Heads went from being a 3-piece to a 4-piece, I went to a dentist and got a cap.
You would think we had no sense of humor to watch these old recordings. We look very serious, but it was a very intense period in our lives. And we were playing to exceedingly quiet audiences. I would say they were quiet for the most part, with the exception of a few punks like Dick Manitoba, who said, "What are you, a bunch of lesbians?" Just because there was a girl in the band. But I liked being a sideman. I was so self-conscious. I hated to be photographed. So I liked being on the side, and I just loved these guys. I thought they were so brave. Chris was just the most amazing drummer. I mean, even before anybody had played a note, he was making music. And David was a wonderful guitarist. He's actually left-handed, but he's playing a right-handed guitar.
I liked the 3-piece idea at first because you could pretty much musically get in all the various, you could kind of sketch out everything that was musically essential. Nothing was filled out to the extent that it actually sounded luscious and beautiful. It was all just kind of sketched out. It was all just kind of the bare bones of what you needed for a song. If you took one of these elements away, you'd really notice it. But this was just barely enough to kind of meet the requirements of a song and a band.
We're all very serious looking because we're trying to do our best, and there were really no monitors to speak of. I mean, there were monitors, but they didn't work. So we were sort of playing by the seat of our pants at all times at CBGB's.
I guess some of these songs I was being a little bit of an anthropologist from Mars, trying to figure out what it meant to be a human, being somebody in your mid-20s, and what does love mean, and what does it mean to have a job, and what does it mean what's my relationship to the government, what's my relationship to the suburbs where I grew up and where I don't live anymore. All those things puzzled me. I couldn't figure them out. I didn't know whether the answer lay in kind of an anthropological view, like just look at people as if they were some kind of tribe or animals and figure out, well, what did they do? Why did they do that? Am I supposed to do that too? Well, I was kind of figuring that out as I went along, and some of that came out in the songs as well.
These lyrics were David's, of course, on this song, I'm Not in Love. I guess he actually believed that someday we'll live in a world without love. His vision of the future, I don't think he was being ironic when he said that.
A lot of the bands at that time, not all of them, but a lot of them were also kind of eschewed guitar solos as being an indulgence that was typical of kind of the big popular arena bands that were playing around at the time. And so we wanted to do everything that they weren't doing, or everything that they did we didn't want to do. So guitar solos, for one, were out, except for Television, who played great guitar solos.
Now here we go, see? This is the garage rock David Byrne that I loved.
This is Seymour Stein. He was the head of Sire Records, and a number of record companies came down and saw us, or they sent their A&R people or their talent scouts or whatever they were called at that point. I remember there was a guy from CBS Records. We did a demo at CBS Studios, and they were obviously a big company. Seymour had a small company that he owned himself, but it had distribution through larger networks. And we would meet with these people, and it's kind of scared us, and we didn't know what to make of it, and I don't think they knew what to make of us. And we were doing okay. We were attracting an audience at that point, and making enough money on the door from these clubs that we could kind of pay our rent and quit our day jobs. So we didn't have to sign right away, and we didn't think that the offers were going to go away because we were just getting more popular in the clubs. So we kind of waited and kind of read books about music business and what the various legal clauses meant and what you can expect for an advancer and what does publishing mean and all this kind of stuff, which turned out to have been a smart move in retrospect.
This is the first song we ever wrote together. We actually wrote it in our painting studio, Tina and my painting studio at the Rhode Island School of Design. David came in and he had the beginnings of a song and he wanted us to help him finish it. And we did. This verse is not in the recording on the album.
This was our most popular song at first. Later on, other songs became more popular, but this was one of the first ones. And this was a song that I wrote as an exercise to see if I could write a song. I didn't take it that seriously. It was sort of I imagined kind of a folky, introspective version of a Alice Cooper type song. And I thought, let's see if something like that can work. And, well, it worked, and people really liked it, and it became an albatross around our necks.
The scene at CBGB's sort of brought together all of the musicians that were sort of standing against what the record companies at that time were signing, which was bands that had gotten overly complicated, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Yes. It had begun with the New York Dolls. Then Patti Smith came around and was playing the other end, and other places in the Village. And then the scene at CBGB's came along, and these sort of lonely outposts of new music finally had a place that they could really play. And the other thing that was very important was that Hilly Crystal gave the band the door. He took out a little money for the PA and for Charlie, who was the sound man. And this was unbelievably fair. Nowadays, and particularly in LA or various places, bands often have to pay to play. That is, they have to guarantee a certain number of tickets will be bought. So it makes it really impossible for bands to find shows that they can do and to develop. and they have an extremely hard time finding an audience. Whereas Hilly created something that was fair, and so we could go in and do a weekend and really have enough money to live for most of a month from what we made at CBGB's, and we played there every couple of months, and so it meant that we really could leave our day jobs and concentrate on music. And I can't stress enough how important having that wonderful venue was to the development of all of these bands.
Ah, loud applause from all 50 people. The Kitchen, of course, was an arts performance space in Soho, back when Soho was still an arty place.
I look at myself now, the person I was then, and my nervousness in front of people, and my strange way of talking and addressing people. And, well, it seems like I'm a slightly different person now. And that person, the one I'm looking at now, he wasn't faking it. That was not a kind of persona that I put on. It was, I was very shy.
We sold out the Kitchen that night. I remember we were very happy to hear that John Cale had arrived late and couldn't get in. Not that he couldn't get in, but just the fact that John Cale was refused admittance meant that we were, I don't know, going somewhere.
David was often very quiet when we would be sitting around brainstorming, and I was just an awful art school chatterbox, I think. I just had so many ideas all the time.
I would say that the sound on this is pretty true to what we really sounded like back then.
I still have that bass guitar. I don't know if David, I don't think David has that little Music Master made by Fender anymore. I think that was stolen on our very first tour before we left for Europe. It was just an awful, awful, crippling situation 3 days before we went on our first tour, because we were living on $5 a day. Seymour Stein went out and bought David Byrne 2 brand new, well, I wouldn't say brand new, but they were beautiful. A Fender Stratocaster and a Gibson. I thought, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do to replace my my guitar. It wasn't this one, thank goodness. That one was packed away, but it was the one I was using at the time, a little red Mustang.
Well, I think I forgot the words right there. It's another one of my anthropology songs, I think. I wasn't talking about lesbians. I was just talking about girls having girlfriends and being friends with one another, which, as opposed to being backstabbing and being catty with one another. So it was meant to be a kind of celebration of women getting along with one another, as opposed to being set at each other.
I was doing my best to make it funky. Still learning how to be funky at that point. I just remembered that I was extremely nervous because my mom and dad were in the audience. They came up from Pittsburgh to see this show.
Thank you. This guy was known as Whispering Bob. He was the host of this TV show in Britain that ran for many years. You can tell why he's called Whispering Bob. Okay, now Jerry has joined the group. He joined a little bit before we made our first record. So when we got to play after that and just before that, Jerry joined us and filled out the sound of the band, and the sound actually started to sound a little bit less sparse. It was a little bit more pleasant to listen to, but we were careful not to kind of make it sound too lush. That would have been verboten.
Jerry was a great addition, really filled out the sound, and great player and wonderful guy.
What I remember the most about this show was that the rehearsal was very early in the afternoon, and then we went down to basically the bar beneath the studio and hung around for about 6 hours. This was at a time where David and I had gotten into drinking vermouth. And so we were sitting there and drinking and drinking. And then when we came upstairs to do this show, it was like, oh my God, I have really drunk a lot. We then also went out with Rick Wakeman, who was on the show this night, who was completely plastered. So I don't think that I compared to him, but it was a challenge playing this show. I think you can see it in my expression.
David's wearing a yellow polo shirt that Chris accidentally shrank in the dryer.
I was trying with my drum part to make this sound like an Al Green song. Of course, it didn't exactly come out that way, but that was the intention.
I'm giving the camera the eye there. It's a little bit corny, Dave.
Jerry was the rock star of the band. You could kind of tell, can't you?
He gets so passionate about his music, but all the English roadies used to tease him and call him Doris and say he was swanning.
This show, The Old Grey Whistle Test, a very influential TV show in England, and everybody played it.
This is one of those songs where people didn't know exactly if we were being serious or not. I mean, did we really want to live in a high-rise, and were we really saying that the government is okay and we shouldn't be worrying about it, and everything's going to be happy and the government will help take care of us? Well, yes and no. Whether living in a high-rise with lots of conveniences was really something I believed in, well, I don't really know if that's true or not, but maybe I was convincing myself.
Oh, this was our first big show in New York City at the Intermedia Theater.
This is a lovely theater on 12th Street and 2nd Avenue, I think it is. Might be 3rd Avenue. It's now a multiplex cinema. At least it hasn't been torn down.
What records would you suggest the Talking Heads listen to?
Oh, this girl is gorgeous. Not only that, but brilliant. But that was our fans. They were so wonderful.
Radio in New York so that we could never get exposed to it.
They're so sensitive, you know. They weren't the kind that would come and bother us, you know.
They're like the true meaning of New Wave, like the ideals of New Wave. They represent it.
The show is sold out. Yes, it is. It is. Is there standing room available?
Oh, there's John Rockwell of the New York Times, Andy Warhol. Hey.
For the Talking Heads album today, and I couldn't find it. Was it sold out in all the stores? Sold out. I couldn't get it anywhere.
This was a wonderful show. I think this is the first time we played outside of the clubs in Manhattan. And, you know, it's a sense of like you've moved up to theaters.
Oh, by now, maybe, yeah, it sounds like by now we'd had a second record out, More Songs About Buildings and Food, which was, in a way, poking fun at the fact that a lot of our songs were about buildings and food. By this point, we'd also started to, partly with the encouragement of Brian Eno, who produced that second record, we began switching around instruments, like Tina playing a sort of rolling bass line on the piano as opposed to playing bass guitar. Later, we would take that swapping instruments thing even further.
You can see in this song that David's moved to an electric 12-string. In the earlier clips, he was playing in a acoustic 12-string with a mic on it, and which had a tendency to feed back and to be a lot harder to control as the PAs got louder. His idea of the 12-string was that when he was the only rhythm and lead instrument in the band, when it was bass and drums, that he needed to make a lot of sound, so a 12-string was a good idea. When I joined the band, then it sort of freed him to be not just make as much noise as he could, but be a little bit more selective. But he kept the 12-string.
We're starting to sound like a real band at this point, which isn't, for some people, that was not a good thing. For some people, they liked the kind of, the earlier version where we were sort of an idea of a band, but didn't quite sound like one. And some people might have felt that some of our eccentricities were being smoothed out as we kind of became more competent, but I think we kind of kept enough of them in there.
Long before we ever had a percussionist, Chris was rocking it hard.
This is Sproul Plaza, which is an outdoor plaza at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. And I think it's our manager, Gary Kurfürst, who had the idea that we should occasionally do some free concerts. This was probably, he'd worked with kind of bands in the late 60s and early 70s, and remembered that kind of the free concert was something that really kind of brought in an audience and made fans really like the band and appreciate that the band was kind of giving free music to their fans, and that more people would discover the band, et cetera, et cetera. So he encouraged us to do these every once in a while, and Sproul Plaza happened to be the home of what was called the free speech movement. I think that was back in the 50s and early 60s.
Sproul Plaza is famous for where Mario Savio spoke at the free speech movement, which was sort of the first of the, we'll say, the student movements in the United States, predating all of the demonstrations about the Vietnam War, et cetera, that came in the late 60s. So I found it really exciting to be playing there, and also just that we would just drive up on the sidewalks and drive across to the lawns in the middle of the quadrangle or the commons or whatever they call it there to get to the stage.
We were all really fried because we had played at the boarding house the night before and probably gone to bed about 3 o'clock in the morning or later even. And we did 2 sets at the boarding house, 2 shows. They turned the house in between, and then we're doing a 12 noon concert at Berkeley the next morning. But that's what you gotta do to succeed in this business.
I think at this point, this would have been, again, 78, 79. The audience there would be slightly familiar with us. They would have heard of us, but most of them, I think, would not have our records or be familiar with a lot of the songs. There were a few local radio stations, like here in Berkeley and in San Francisco and some other places that were starting to play some of our music, and some of the other bands that were coming up around the same time. But it was kind of slow going. which in retrospect was fine. We didn't get thrown into being incredibly popular that quickly, although it was a steady increase in popularity. But we sort of had to find places to play. And in some cities, there was no place that would have us. We either weren't well known enough, or there was no sort of medium-sized venue anymore. There was only big arenas or really dumpy little clubs.
This song goes back to the Artistics, which was the band that David and I had. We wrote this song together. David the music and I the lyrics back at Rhode Island School of Design. I was always very happy with this drum beat. I remember people in England thought this song, the name of the song is Warning Sign, but people in England thought it was Born Insane. Born Insane.
I love this song, Warning Sign. It's just such an amazing song. The lyrics are written by Chris. That's an old Gibson Les Paul bass I was using then.
And actually the two promoters, student promoters, Ken Friedman and Tony Milan, went on to have careers in the music business, and they got their start here at Sproul Plaza.
This is Saturday Night Live. We got invited to play there, which we thought was a great thrill.
Now, if Jerry looks a little odd here, besides wearing that kung fu outfit, and he keeps looking back at his amp, that's because he had no sound. But you'll notice he played perfectly, because though he had no sound coming through his amp, someone had tripped on a wire or something, he continued to play note perfect throughout.
This was a very difficult performance for me. If you'll notice, I keep looking around, and what is going on is that we had done the sound check and everything was fine, but when we went on to do this song, the union techs had disconnected my instruments from the monitor system so that I couldn't hear them, and I don't believe the audience could either, but they did go out to what at that time was the largest audience that Saturday Night Live had ever had. And I had very many changes on the synthesizer, and if you would hit the wrong button, it could be an entirely different type of sound. So it was it could be a really dramatic mistake. So I was sort of playing blind as we did this.
We were all pretty nervous because it was our first time ever on live television. And Saturday Night Live was huge. And this was when John Belushi and all the original cast, with the exception of Chevy Chase, were still there. And Dan Aykroyd and Gilda Radner and Jane Curtin. And right before we went on, they said, we think we got about 19 million people watching tonight. Something like that. Made us kind of nervous.
These are wonderful lyrics written by an artist from Rhode Island School of Design, a friend of ours named Michael Zeev. He also helped us find our name, Talking Heads, out of a TV guide. I'm wearing some stupid pipe cleaners in my hair because that's what our manager told me to do, and I was always doing whatever anybody told me to do. For the most part, I thought it was it might be a good idea that I hadn't thought of.
This is a pretty odd song to be doing on Saturday Night Live. I mean, it's sort of like this weird instrumental, and then it has these kind of shouted out declamations about kind of nervous artist.
Oh, Jerry, I feel for you, man. We were one of the first bands to get the Prophet 5, and what a wonderful instrument. I have one, Chris and I have one to this day that we've had made into, it's MIDI-able now. It's a fabulous instrument. Nice touch from Chris's part, dropping those drumsticks.
American Bandstand. This is a very big deal for us to get on American Bandstand, because that was, mainstream.
This was a very odd scene. It was out in the valley in L.A., and there was just something so insanely artificial feeling about the show. And they filmed 3 shows in a row, so after we had finished our show, we walked out and we were leaving, and all the kids rushed out to these vans where they then changed costumes so that they looked different for the next show. And so you'll see all these people sort of in various states of undress all through the parking lot, of course playing music at the same time and dancing around. They had a great time, but it was unusual.
This is a lip sync because it's American Bandstand. This was like a dream come true, to be with Dick Clark on American Bandstand with these kids who were so amazing. They were out in their parking lot. They had their cars all rigged with special little rods to hold all their clothes, because they would carry an amazing wardrobe around. It's dozens of shoes in their trunks and every kind, because they would get selected by how they were dressed that day, and they'd line up. And then, the people working for Dick Clark would say, yeah, that works or that doesn't. And they'd send them, and they'd go back to the parking lot and change their outfits if it didn't work, if they didn't get in the first time.
Dick Clark was really a nice guy, really nice to us, and he'd really done his homework. He'd researched the band's history and all of our names and where we were born and stuff like that. And he did a little interview with us before we performed, so that he would be able to speak to us with some knowledge. He was a super pro.
This is a song made famous by Al Green. It was written by him and Teenie Hodges, and I think one of the other Hodges brothers wrote it. And it was a big hit at Al Green's live shows, but it was not a radio single. And oddly enough, the year that we recorded it, a whole bunch of other people recorded it. Foghat, and I think Brian Ferry did a version, and there were about 5 versions of this song that all came out within about a year or so. And ours, well, it did pretty well, but it didn't sound very much like Mr. Green's version at all.
Talking Heads never did another cover song after this. This was on our second album. But, it was going to take a long time before a Talking Heads song was going to become accessible. And now I hear Dave Matthews is just played Burning Down the House in a stadium. So we're proud of that.
Take Me to the River is a reference to being baptized and being born again in that kind of way. Al Green was really good at mixing together ambiguous sexual imageries and Baptist religious imageries in a way that was really interesting and confusing. It was not part of my growing up tradition, but it resonated. A band like ours was not a typical band that would be on American Bandstand. Usually it was, you had to have a song in the top 10 or top 20 or something like that. And it was really mainstream music, tended to be white mainstream music. And we kind of snuck in, I guess, to the top 20 or something with this cover of the Al Green song. And so that qualified us.
How on earth, then, do you get up in front of people and do this? I mean, do you flog yourself into it? Are you not an extrovert?
No, I always figure I don't know the people. I get really nervous if there's friends out there.
Yeah, I don't like to work in front of anybody I ever know. Has this been going on a long time? Have you been people been making your music together? Were you from the same neighborhood or something like that?
Well, we're not from the same neighborhood originally, but we live in the same neighborhood now.
Where'd you come from?
We came from all over the United States, California, Southern California, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Baltimore, and Lexington, Kentucky.
That's a weird conglomeration of different things. I asked a question earlier, you weren't there, and I think Tina, she gave me an answer. I'll go back and check with her. If you were to have your professional dreams come true, what would it be? What would you want to accomplish? It's a tough, heavy question. No, would it be a place to play, a goal to reach?
I just think you'd want to feel that you'd affected people.
Affected people. Give me that answer you gave me. That was pretty interesting. You remember what it was?
Oh, it was pretty highfalutin, I guess.
Give me the highfalutin answer.
Well, we want to make our mark in music history.
The genesis of this band was that when we finished making Remain in Light, we decided that we were going to try and see if we could play all the parts that we had overdubbed ourselves by hiring enough musicians to do it all at once. And we had a show in Central Park, and there was a festival called Heatwave up in Toronto. So I left the studio, and I had been playing around New York, and so I'd actually been spending more time in New York in the, we'll say, the off season or between records. And I'd gotten to know this bass player, Busta Jones. He and I had a sort of a punk funk band called the Escalators that put out a record or an EP in Canada. And he had introduced me to Dolette McDonald, who's the girl singer who sings with us. And I had met Bernie Worrell from Funkadelic, and we had met Adrian, and who I'd gone down and sort of dug up at the Mud Club when we were recording Remain in Light and got him to come up and play on the record. So I left the studio, and literally within about 2 hours, I'd gotten them all to sort of say, well, let's do this experiment. We're going to do these 2 shows. It'll be 2 weeks of your life. So I went back to the studio and I said, like, I can't believe it. We have just the most amazing band. We found Steve Scales a few days later. I think Bernie recommended him. But this band was a really powerful band in some ways. It was we could hang with any band at that time and give as powerful a performance as anybody.
And this was the first version of a larger expanded band that we tried out around this time to realize those kind of songs. Not only did the larger band enable us to perform the songs somewhat accurately, it generated a really different feeling on stage. The kind of small band, especially the 3-piece, of course, was really kind of stripped down. It was about the idea of the song and not the kind of pleasure of it. And now, with this larger band, there was this whole community on stage, and the music was a lot more groove-oriented. So the audience was dancing, we were all dancing, and all the different parts fit together like a puzzle. And you had this feeling of being involved in something that was kind of greater than the sum of any of the parts being really simple. And if you just took one of the parts out, like my guitar part, it wouldn't sound like anything. It would just sound like a lot of scratching, or somebody else's part would just be like one little puzzle piece, and you wouldn't be able to tell what the whole sounded like if you just removed and listened to that part. But when you put them all together, it made something, and you were part of it. So there's this very different feeling than when you had a small group where you're playing your parts, what you were doing kind of had to carry the whole thing.
We learned how to get funky now. When we debuted this band, people went nuts because they were used to just the 4 of us and kind of a stripped down sound. And then with the additional players, we really rocked the party.
You just saw Adrian Ballou playing guitar. I hope he still has that guitar. That is the most. All he does is just bend the neck a little bit, and he gets the most amazing sounds out of that. He's a brilliant player. A friend of ours was once at EG Records, where where Brian Eno was managed and where Robert Fripp and King Crimson were managed. And this friend went to, overheard someone complimenting him on, oh, what a genius Adrian Belew is. What a blessing that you got him into your band. And Robert Fripp, who has a very wry wit, to say the least, turned to him and said, oh, Adrian Belew, he's just an idiot savant. So I told this story to Robert Palmer, who's such a brilliant, brilliant musician and singer. And ever since then, whenever he wanted to tell me that, oh, I have this genius guitar player in my touring band this year, all he had to do was say, Tina, I found another idiot savant. There's the adorable Dolette. One day, Dolette was running through the hall and wearing nothing but a pair of silk panties, and oh my, she was every boy's fantasy, and she was so wild and so cute and so smart. Her goal was she was going to become the best background singer that ever was, and I think she achieved it.
I always enjoyed playing theaters like the Capitol Theater, which is in Passaic, New Jersey. There was something about the old theaters that you knew that people like Dean Martin or Frank Sinatra or Glenn Miller or other bands, that there was this tradition that they went back. One of my favorites was Kane's Ballroom in Tulsa, where you saw pictures of Bob Wills or Dolly Parton or other country greats, and to feel that you were sort of now part of this great American music history because you had been playing the same clubs and the same theaters was sort of one of the most gratifying aspects of developing with the Talking Heads. One of the great things about being in this big band is that we were always our own party wherever we traveled. Just wherever we were, it was like an exciting scene because there were at least 10 of us or something like that with the crew, or 15 of us, and we sort of could create our own party.
Because the music was more groove-oriented and it was a larger band and everybody was having a good time, I started dancing more. I didn't have to play guitar all the time as I used to. And like on this song, I don't have a guitar, so I'm free to move around when I'm not glued to the microphone singing. So later in the song, I do a whole twitchy dance, which evolved into more elaborate kind of improvised, choreographed things later on. I was trying to come up with dance moves that weren't typical rock and roll dance moves. Well, I think I succeeded in that. But it meant that I would kind of improvise these things and come upon them gradually, little by little. And if something kind of felt like it worked to me and that I'd never seen it before, but it also fit with the song, then I would kind of remember that and do it again the next time we performed the song. The lyrics were kind of an answer to the romantic idea that everything that animals did was natural and therefore good, and that as opposed to people being not natural. And so I wrote a song saying that, well, animals have their problems too,
We had some weird songs, but this song, Animals, is possibly one of the weirdest. Same band as the previous song. We seem to be more dressed up in this one, though. This is a big, huge indoor place. The other bands on the bill were Roxy Music, Dire Straits, and Mike Oldfield. And the reviews of the show the next day said that Talking Heads blew everybody else off the stage. But that's just like their opinion. This was the last concert of that tour that leg of the tour. I think it was like the 20th of December or something like that. And then this was shown live on German television, or rather broadcast on German television on Christmas Day.
There's the marvelous Steve Scales on percussion. He looked like a Greek god at that time. A veteran of Vietnam, veteran Marine. He really injected an amazing force into our band. You know, we were playing so much, Steve had to tape up his fingers just to keep from getting bone spurs. I don't think we ever moved until we got people like Steve Scales and Bernie Worrell and Buster Jones and Dolette McDonald into our group. We started to move after that. But we never had a choreographer. Check out our 80s outfits.
The US Festival. The US Festival, of course, was one of the hugest audience we ever played for, or maybe the hugest. 150,000 or something like that. Out in the desert. It was hot as fire.
It was surreal, just in that we had never played to an audience as big as that. It was out near San Bernardino in this kind of barren meadow that, of course, had become trampled by people, so sort of dusty. It was 3 days of music that was sponsored by Steve Wozniak, who, with Steve Jobs, was one of the co-founders of Apple Computers. And he was sitting on the side of the stage in a couch with his family and I guess a few select friends enjoying the show. So it was sort of, we were playing to 125,000 people and a family of one.
Well, it looks like we've moved on here to a different kind of fashion statement, kind of almost dress shirts buttoned up to the collar. Oh yeah, I think I had the idea that I should start off the shows dressed as neatly as possible, all buttoned up, nice and tight, and then it would be natural and kind of dramatic if, as I got sweatier and sweatier as the show progressed, that I would kind of unbutton my top button and the shirt would get all soaked, and eventually I'd pull it out of my pants and try and keep cool and just be all drenched in sweat. And that would be, you'd see the kind of physical progression I was going through during the show. In this song, I attempted to deal with love as if it was some kind of mathematical symbolic logic thing, where you could draw lines and if then greater than goes to, etc., and you could figure things out by some kind of symbolic logic deduction. Didn't really work.
Now, I'm very pregnant here with my firstborn. I had to kind of play side saddle a little, but I was very encouraged by seeing both Nina Hagen, she toured pregnant, and so did Grace Jones. And that just empowered me to feel that I could do it too. the music just took us to very spiritual places, and I give a lot of that credit to all of these sidemen who joined us for these tours, as well as the audiences who were just so supportive.
David Bowie came to see us here. He said, he was backstage, he said, "Do you mind, are you guys going to eat that cheese? Do you mind if and he put it in his pocket. That he said, are you going to eat those nuts? They took the nuts and put them in his pocket. I thought that was kind of funny, especially for such a skinny guy.
This is the Montreux Jazz Festival that we played at on that tour. In Europe, there were quite a few jazz festivals that booked acts like us that were pretty far from being jazz, but maybe the fact that we were American and kind of had some kind of musical integrity meant that we could kind of fit in and be respected.
Like playing the Capitol Theater, playing the Montreux Jazz Festival was exciting because of its sense of history. It's also an incredibly beautiful city on a smaller lake above Lake Geneva. And I believe that Steve Miller opened for us there, which I think that it had started off that it was going to be Laurie Anderson, and she had canceled. And he was a very, very gracious person, and it was enjoyable to get to know him.
My favorite Talking Heads lighting is not this. We had to stand in front of the lighting rig, so not everybody is lit. There's a spot on David, but people are pretty much in the dark here. The best Talking Heads lighting was in the early days, and we use it now for Tom Tom Club, which is just a white wash. It's just every color, but all these flashy lights do nothing for. Especially, this was a band, you wanted to watch the whole band. You wanted to have the option to watch everyone. I don't mind not being seen because I'm as round as a tick. But I wish you could see what I'm playing because that was fun.
This was another one of the songs where I was asking myself questions. Obviously, you're like, what kind of city do I want to live in? What do I like about a city? What is this city like? Do I like that? There were a lot of songs like that where I was just trying to figure things out, and I ended up writing a song about it.
Seems like the audience is pretty into it there. I don't know if they're exactly jazz fans or not. But of course, all the jazz festivals have different types of music now. That looks like the flag of Jamaica behind David's head there. Tina was pregnant with our first child. One time when we were touring with this band in Minnesota, Bob Dylan came to see us, and Bob Dylan, later on we met him again, and he said, "Oh, Talking Heads, you're the band with the pregnant bass player." She wasn't always pregnant, just twice. That was a great honor for us to be asked to play the Montreux Jazz Festival.
This is an appearance on a David Letterman show. When we got asked to be on this show, I asked them if they would broadcast our performance in black and white. I don't know why exactly, but I have an idea. I thought this would make it stand out from all the other music performances that they broadcast every night.
Oh, I love this intro. This was done specially for us.
We asked David Letterman to do some weird effects with the visuals, and this is what they came up with.
The band has morphed again. It looks like the Stop Making Sense band. So Bernie's still on keyboards. Dolette has gone and has been replaced by Lynn Mabry and Edna Holt. Lynn was a friend of Bernie Worrell's. She was in Brides of Funkenstein. And Edna, I'm not sure where she came from, but I ran into her the other day on the street. She's teaching in New York. Alex is still playing guitar. My sartorial look this time was, the live show evolved into the big suit, but this was kind of the normal-sized version of the big suit. I had versions made that were kind of normal, and then during the live show, at some point I'd go off stage and come back with the giant one on. But the show started with me wearing this kind of normal size, I think this is the normal size one, kind of linen suit. And I thought, okay, it won't get too hot and sweaty in there. I adopted this hairstyle, which was slicked back and had some kind of product in it. And like my earlier idea that I would wear a nicely buttoned-up shirt and then get progressively more disheveled looking as the show progressed, the hair kind of thing did that too. So in the beginning of the show, I would show up like a very neat sort of 50s, 60s kind of businessman, maybe a vampire, depending on your point of view. And then by the time the show progressed, the hair would be all messed up, hanging down all over the place.
This song, of course, was a huge hit in America and I guess other places too. When we played it, the kids went nuts. It got to the point where we would actually play the song twice in the set because once during the set and then again for the encore. Nobody complained about hearing it twice. Steve Scales is really working those tom-toms.
Jerry, be careful. Don't hurt your knees. Jerry's so excited. You could just see it's like this pent-up machine in there. He just wants to jump. Look at Steve. He's playing those rototoms. That was a great part. Steve played that on the album, too.
Now here we are at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame many years later. Hairstyles have changed.
This was a great night because it was great to play together again. We took playing after all those years pretty seriously, and we rehearsed for 3 days in New York, and it was exciting to sort of recapture the excitement of all those years we'd played together.
Chris is just so happy. We just slipped right into this stuff like it was yesterday after not playing together for, what was it, nearly 20 years? 18 years?
A lot of people have not very nice things to say about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but all I can say is we had a ball that night. the Ramones were also inducted, so the same night. So it was great fun. Oh, right before we went on, somebody tripped over the power cable to the keyboards, so all the keyboards went out of tune. Bernie and Jerry had to work with the tuning on the thing while they were playing. This was right after the horrible events of 9/11, September 11th, that is, and so this song had kind of special significance.
This was done just after 9/11, and I'd been on tour, and eventually, for a while, I stopped playing this song, Life During Wartime. It seemed a little too close to home. But then after a while, I started doing it again, and it seemed to have of course, every line in it seemed to have a completely different meaning, a completely new meaning than what it meant when it was originally written. This song has a lot of words, and it's kind of hard to remember them all. Luckily, I'd been on tour, and this was something I did at the end or in the middle of my own tour, and I'd been performing this song, so I had them all memorized, and it went fine. But the song's kind of a handful lyrically to get all that stuff straight. Originally, the lyrics of "This Ain't No Party, This Ain't No Disco," it was perceived as being, when it was written, when it first came out, as being this kind of anti-disco song, which it wasn't. It was basically saying that it was from the point of view of a kind of some urban guerrillas, Bader Meinhof gang types, and Weathermen, whatever, who used to go to clubs and discos and dance and drink and party, but they had to leave that life behind because they found a higher calling, which was whatever, the destruction of the government, and or urban warfare, or whatever you want to call it. And so they couldn't go to their clubs anymore. They didn't have time, and obviously it was not a good security measure for them to be going out to nightclubs. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is sort of an odd event. You get to see all these musicians who you've loved and been inspired by, and they're all gray and old, just like you are. Sometimes it's maybe better not to see that kind of thing.
Our manager, Gary Kurfürst, was just beaming through all of this. He was just so thrilled. He had 2 bands inducted that night, the Ramones and Talking Heads. I should say Ramones and Talking Heads because neither band had a "the" in front of the name. That wasn't cool back then.
This is great because we had a chance to thank all the people that really helped us. Seymour Stein from Sire Records, our manager, Gary Kurfürst, the only manager we ever had, and Hilly Crystal came up on stage with us, Hilly from CBGB's, our longtime agent, Frank Barcelona, our accountant, Bert Padell. All these people, they made a very good team, and they protected us, and they really helped us.
I had one of the thrill of a lifetime. That night I got to ride up in the elevator with Steve Cropper. Oh, I just about fainted.
Another thrilling moment in this was we did Take Me to the River as the encore, and when we introduced background singing to that song was when we had the girl singers in the band, like the Stop Making Sense band, or when Dolette was in the band. But for this performance, on both Life During Wartime and Take Me to the River, suddenly Tina and I and Bernie were doing all of the singing, and that was a challenge. And also when we were doing Take Me to the River, to have Steve Cropper and Sam of Sam and Dave singing into my microphone, who was, Sam and Dave were sort of great heroes of mine when I was in high school. Just seemed sort of like, how did I get here? How did this ever happen? So it was a pretty exciting night.
Thank you. Thank you.